here, and I look forward to working with you on you becoming an innovator as well as your company becoming more innovative. I'd like to go back in time here at the beginning. We're going to go to the first picture I ever took with the 35mm camera. I was about 16 years old. My parents gave it to me as a present. I ran outside of our house and snapped that shot. It's a terrible picture, I understand that. But afterwards, I ended up taking hundreds and then thousands of pictures with that camera, and ultimately became good enough to take weddings and portraits, and it was a way to pay my way through university. Now, whenever I travel the world, be it here in Paris or anywhere else, what I've learned from my photography is to always ask the question, what's interesting? When I wandered to this building coming into the auditorium, it's like, there are a lot of interesting things here that I could be taking pictures of. So that's whenever I go, perhaps in different places, I see interesting things. When we lived in Abu Dhabi, these were the Liwa Dunes near Saudi Arabia. They're thousands of feet high. I thought they are very interesting things. A few years ago, I was in the antique markets area of Paris, and I was very surprised to see that plastic pink car up on the wall above one of the shops. And you may have seen it there. I think it still is there. I thought that's interesting. And actually this fall, I'm going to be working with Sam Abel, who was a National Geographic photographer for 30 years. He and I are going to now be doing a workshop to teach senior leaders how to become better leaders through photography. So that's my dream since I was a 16-year-old, to do something like that with somebody like Sam Abel. But if I were to go back in time to 1886, what I just described to you probably never would have happened. Because in 1886, photography was for professionals only. 16-year-olds did not get cameras. And so the cameras were large. They were used by professionals in studios around the world. If I wanted my picture taken, it would cost a lot of money. It would take a fair amount of time, and relatively few people could afford to do it. George Eastman lived at that point in time. He worked in the industry. He worked in the film side of the industry. And he actually bought some of this equipment to go on vacation with his family. Imagine that. 1886, taking that kind of photo equipment on vacation with your family. A few days before they were to leave on vacation, they ended up getting sick, the family, and they did not go. So George was sitting in his front room looking at all of that equipment when his family didn't go on vacation. And he thought to himself, there's got to be a better way for someone like me to take camera equipment on vacation. He worked the idea, and he worked it, and he did the innovation work needed. 3 or 4 years later, he actually discovered a way to do it. George Eastman invented the idea of putting film on a roll, not on a plate. He literally put that film into a cardboard box with some black paper around it. It cost US $1. It ended up disrupting the photography industry, fundamentally disrupted it. What it did in terms of innovation, it took a complex, expensive process that relatively few people could have access to, the earlier photographer, and it changed that into something that was simple, inexpensive, and available to thousands, then millions, if not billions. And that kind of disruptive idea creates new markets. Those are the ones that create economic growth and deep value. And so off they went. 1900 to 1947, we fast forward. My mother was actually traveling through Paris after World War II. She stopped in downtown Paris, had her picture taken. It was taken with a Brownie No. 3 Kodak camera. It was a sustaining innovation. It was a camera that wasn't revolutionary. It was a little bit better than the Brownie No. 1. It doesn't create the same kind of economic value that a disruptive innovation does. Now we're going to fast forward. 1963, Fujifilm was a film. They sold film in Japan. 1963 was the first year they went to the United States. They came to where Kodak was a monopoly. And they sold film cheaper than Kodak did. And Kodak immediately went to the US government and said, something's not fair here. They must be getting subsidized by the Japanese government. 40 years of legal battles later, the fundamental conclusion was no, Fujifilm never received any government subsidies. They simply knew how to make film cheaper, which then forced Kodak to get into efficiency innovations. They had to figure out a way to sell their own, to make and sell their own film cheaper, like Fujifilm is doing. Now, here's the story. If you're in a startup, this may not be the issue, but if you're in a medium to smaller size company that's relatively successful, this could be an issue. When we as leaders or technology professionals focus only on efficiency innovations, it can be the beginning of the end of whatever we're doing. Let me go back to Kodak to tell you what I mean. 1975 in Kodak Labs, that was a place where they discovered the first electronic camera. But this was pre-web internet access for the broader public. This was pre-personal computers. The images were not that great. There was no compelling reason to develop the idea, so they didn't. Fast forward then, 2006, which is when I joined INSEAD. We were living in London, moved from London to Paris, joined INSEAD here in France. I wanted later that year to go to the same place my mother had had her picture taken in downtown Paris, and the camera used was a Kodak camera. It was an electronic camera. They were trying to get into the game of electronic cameras and imaging. But then we'll fast forward 6 more years, 2012. One of our daughters was working here in Paris. She wanted to go where her grandmother had had her picture taken. And what kind of camera was used to take that picture? Fuji. It was an iPhone. And so the story is, and it's the story that's pretty common, Kodak the Disruptor in 1900 became Kodak the Disrupted in 2012. And it's not just Kodak's story. I lived in Finland for about 3 years when Nokia was on its meteoric rise to success. It's their story as well. You know, they were the disruptor at one point with Motorola. Now they're the disrupted and part of Microsoft. It's a very different story. So what I'd like to share with you today is how can I be the disruptor and not the disrupted? And the story is going to come from a book that we wrote called The Innovator's DNA, and that book came from the following analysis. We collaborated with Credit Suisse, we looked all over the world, and we tried to figure out what are the most innovative companies on the earth. And we basically called it an innovation premium. And what the innovation premium says is your stock price, if you're a publicly held firm, as part of that price is attributable to existing cash flows from existing businesses. The premium is what investors pay above what's justified by those existing businesses' cash flow. The premium is, I believe you will do something different in the future. You'll have new markets, you'll have new products, you'll have new services, you'll have new business models, you'll have new process. You'll be doing something different, therefore I will pay you a premium for your stock. Salesforce.com had a 5-year premium recently of 73%. Investors still believe they're going to be doing new and different and better things. We've collaborated with Forbes, and we create these lists each year. For the last 2 or 3 years, Salesforce.com has been on the top. But what we did was, 10 years ago, went to the most innovative companies with the highest premiums, and we tried to figure out, how do you do it? We looked inside, and here's what we discovered. They had people who used what we call discovery skills to get new ideas. They had institutionalized processes in place to support lots of people using these skills. And they had philosophies that created the culture that made it all work in a sustainable way. So we interviewed all kinds of folks. We interviewed Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Peter Thiel at PayPal, Nicholas Zennstrom at Skype, Pierre Omidyar at eBay, and so on. And we basically asked them, what were you doing when you got the initial idea that led to these businesses that disrupted your industry? And here's what we discovered, is that if you and I were to shadow them for a day, a week, or a month, their capacity to innovate is actually something you can see. It's behavioral, it's skills, it's things they do consistently to get new ideas. Number one, they really do think differently, and the reason why is because they act differently. You can truly see them doing things on an everyday basis to get new ideas. So how many of you have a problem right now? Raise your hand. How many have a problem you don't have an answer to, but you're trying to get an answer to? Hands up. Now, no personal problems involved here. Forget those. But does everybody have a problem you don't have a solution to? Are we on that? Here's how these folks use these skills to get solutions to problems they don't have a solution to. Number one, they start by asking catalytic questions. They are questioners. They question everything, is what Jack Dorsey at Twitter said, which is what Einstein said long before him. They question everything. They question the unquestionable, is what Ratan Tata said. Can you see the image of this man jumping into the swimming pool? He's got a big smile on his face. He's very happy. And the pool's very deep, the water's warm, there are no sharks in the water. He's jumping off the board. The worst of all worlds for him is that he doesn't know how to swim. And the worst of all worlds is that he doesn't know how to swim. Right? Because if he knew he didn't know how to swim, he would not be jumping off the diving board. But if he doesn't know that he doesn't know how to swim, he's got problems. And so this is a powerful image for me when it comes to innovation. The reason companies get disrupted is because somebody else is asking questions about what they don't know. The first challenge for an innovator is, how do I go there? How do I discover things that I'm unaware of and I'm incompetent at? And let me share you a few things we've discovered about how they do it. Number one, be open. Pierre Opendiar, you know the deal here as a systems analyst. It's like, okay, clean slate. I'm going into a situation, no assumptions, as far as I can possibly clean my assumptions away. You may have heard of this man, Stuart Brand. He invented, or he started the Whole Earth Catalog. He's done a lot of different innovative things with the internet over the years. We talked with Stuart Brand about how does he get such innovative ideas. He told us, every day I wake up wondering how many things I am dead wrong about. 2 or 3 months ago, I was sharing that story in an audience like this for SAP at one of their executive summits, and Hasso Plattner, the co-founder of SAP, was sitting in the front, and I asked, how many of you wake up in the morning like that? And Hasso's hand went right up. He said, that's what I do. Every morning, how many things am I dead wrong about? The second part is they ask very simple questions to probe to figure out what's really going on here. I was talking with Nairana Murthy, who co-founded Infosys, and he basically said, when people ask complex, compound questions, they're either lying or they're confusing people. So go for simple questions, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. These are the ones that really turn the tables upside down. The second piece, or the third piece becomes, be comfortable with being very uncomfortable. The reason we don't like to have people discover what we don't know is because it's uncomfortable to go there. It's really awkward. At Pixar, Ed Catmull, who is a computer scientist by training, he's one of the co-founders of the company Pixar, he is a scientist at heart, and he is a questioner at heart. And he uses those questions to discover opportunities for Pixar to go forward. And once they did the first computer-animated film, they ended up, for Ed Catmull, it was like, wow, we've done the first computer-animated film. What's next? His next adventure was, how could we make a company that is sustainably creative? And at the core of their company is that everybody is asking questions that are uncomfortable. They have a brain trust, they call it, where you're supposed to come and give feedback to a director of a movie that's being created. And in that brain trust, when you show up, you're responsible for being constructive in both positive feedback and things they should be doing differently, and asking questions that make people uncomfortable. And what Ed Catmull says is that that is a place, and their company is a place, where they want to be brutally honest with their feedback without being brutal. That takes a lot of trust in a system to go into a space where people ask those sorts of questions. So the important and difficult job as a leader and an innovator is never to find the right answers, it's to ask the right questions. And what Peter Drucker said after this is there's nothing more useless nor dangerous than the right answers to the wrong questions. And so innovators are always trying to figure out what's the right question here. This guy's name is David Neeleman. He was born in Brazil, grew up there, and then he moved to the United States. And he ended up being part of several airlines. One was Morris Air that was bought by Southwest Airlines, one of the first low-cost airlines in the world. Ryanair and other ones around the world they're copies, basically, of Southwest Airlines. David Neeleman is always asking provocative questions. Now, some of you, if I were to look out there, might be old enough to remember when you had to have paper tickets. Do you remember those days? You had to have the paper ticket to get on an airplane. Well, when he was working with Morris Air, David and his team were running these big boxes of paper tickets to the airport to give to people when they arrive. And at one point, somebody asked David, why are we carrying these big boxes to the airport every day? And David's like, I don't know. Why couldn't we do it a different way? And he actually ended up being one of the creators of paperless ticketing. Later on, his company, Morris Air, got sold to Southwest. Then he left Southwest because he was actually fired for being too innovative at one of the most innovative companies of the world, Southwest Airlines. And then he founded JetBlue, which was a very successful, low-cost, pretty good service airline. And then recently he went back to Brazil in order to found an airline in the country where he grew up called Azul Airlines. Anybody flown on Azul Airlines? I never quite know. So you've got this duopoly down there. They ended up going into Brazil trying to start this airline. And here's how they did it. Essentially, the first place was coming out of Sao Paulo. They could not get landing rights at the Sao Paulo airport. But they had started building the company. They'd taken out leases for the planes. They had schedules. They had systems they were setting up. And about halfway through the process, they still couldn't get the landing rights. So they got landing rights at an airport an hour away from Sao Paulo. What they discovered was that the taxi ride from downtown Sao Paulo to the airport an hour away that they could get landing rights at, the taxi ride cost more than the airplane fare. And David's like, we got a problem. People are not going to want to take that kind of a taxi out there. So he basically said to his people, why don't we build a massive bus feeder system for tens of thousands of people to get from downtown Sao Paulo to the airport an hour away? And his CFO and his other managers said, airlines don't do that, David. And David's response was, well, why not? Why can't we? And that's what they ended up doing, was building it so they could actually succeed. So remember that problem you've got a challenge to? You can use your questions and better questions to get a better answer. I'm going to tell you a method that you might consider using to become a better questioner yourself or with your team. Number one, pick a problem or possibility. You already have one in your mind. Number two, brainstorm nothing but questions about the problem or possibility. What I mean by that is don't answer the questions and don't explain the questions to yourself or anybody else. Try to generate as many questions as you possibly can about an issue. That's sort of the first part. Then once we get lots of questions, we prioritize some key ones that we're going to go get answers to, and then we get to work. I'm going to do this for 1 or 2 minutes with the broader group. Can we put the lights up in the house? Lights up, please. Somebody will. We'll get to it. Here's what I want you to do. All over the world, I find this a challenge. I just don't have time to innovate. I just don't have time to get disruptive ideas. Maybe that's part of your world. I suspect if it's not part of your world, it's somebody you work with. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to spend 2 minutes generating with 2 or 3 people around you. Let's see how many questions you can ask about that problem. Why it's a problem, how you could solve it. You ready to give it a try? Nothing but questions. Don't answer them. Don't explain why. See how many questions. Write them down if you can, if you have something to write them down. If not, try to just generate as many possible questions as you can. Sound good? 1 or 2 minutes, go. Groups of 2 or 3. Okay. I know that was a very short period of time. Normally, when I do this myself, I take about 4 minutes. We just took 1 or 2 minutes. How many groups of 2 or 3 people, how many of you think you had more than 10 questions? Most. More than 15? Got a few. Okay, great. When I do this with 4 minutes myself, I can usually get about 20 questions. Now here's my next question. How many see the problem just a little bit differently by having asked a lot of questions about it? Just raise your hand, please. Hands up high. Can you see the hands up? Basically, by asking nothing but questions, I see about 1/3 of the people in the room with 2 minutes of investment of their time seeing the problem a little bit differently. So let me tell you a quick example, then we're going to move on from questioning. And that is, I've done this sort of exercise with Ahmet Bozer on the left, who's the president of Coca-Cola International. He's Turkish by birth, and with Suri Eberli on the right, who's the global people officer at Coca-Cola. Different times, different places, different teams. They each had strategic issues they could not get solutions to. They literally came together with a group of 30 or 40 people with their team. We got flip charts around the room. We did this questioning exercise we just did with you. We asked these groups of 4 to 5 people to generate 75 or more questions. And they actually generated more than that for the most part. They had hundreds of questions. It changed their perspective on the issue that they were stuck on. And then they got to work to try to solve it. So for what it's worth, if you've got a tough issue, individually or with your team, it's a powerful way of getting new ideas. Second part, we know from our data, asking nothing but questions can be clever, but if we don't get out of our office and get into the world, it has no impact on ideas that create real value. These folks, they observe, they network, and they experiment. They watch the world to get new data on their questions. They talk to people to get new data on their issues. They also experiment and just try stuff. I want to ask you real quickly, if you had to go out to get an answer to questions you don't have answers to, what's your preference? If you had to choose one, do you prefer observing? That means just watching the world to get new ideas, networking, talking to different people, or just experimenting and trying. Observers, quickly stand up. That's your preference. I'm an observer by choice. That's how I get new ideas. I want everybody to see, who are the observers in the room? Please, stand up. Observers. I suspect there are a few more out there. I know from the data you probably are there, but you're not standing. Good, down. Networkers, you like to talk to people. Please stand up. Up. Here we go. Excellent. Down. Experimenters, you just try this, you try that. Stand up. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, the point becomes the following. Using at least one of these skills helps me get new ideas. So observers, they watch the world carefully. These are pictures of my eyes. Literally, I have 2 small cataracts growing. And essentially, those cataracts in my eyes make it slightly difficult to see at night. It's a wonderful metaphor for the idea that sometimes the more we know up here, the less we actually see. Let me share a quick example from football about the goalie knowing a lot, being professional, but missing something. So there we go. Sometimes we just don't watch. This guy's name is Doug Dietz. He's an engineer by training. He was responsible for GE Healthcare for helping them design really good CAT and MRI scanning machines. How many have ever been in a CAT or MRI scan before? Not very many. For those who've been, would you love to go do it again? Most not. It's generally not a great experience. Doug's team was going to win an award for these machines, an industrial design award, and a couple of weeks before that award, he actually went to a children's hospital for the first time. And what he did was, he was standing there talking to the radiologist, and she asked him to step out of her office because a patient was coming. There was this little girl with her parents walking towards the radiology department, and as that little girl got closer to the office where the CAT and MRI scanning machines were, she became more and more resistant, and she started to cry, and she started to fight, and she did not want to get into those machines. They finally took her in, they sedated her medically, and then they ended up strapping her on a board, putting her in the machine to hold her quiet and still. Doug had no idea that these machines scared children that bad. And that particular little girl had cancer, and she had gone there many times before. She knew what she was getting into. And for Doug, when he saw that, he realized we have to do something to these machines so they don't make children so afraid. As an engineer, he didn't quite know what to do. He went to the design school at Stanford, learned some of the things we're talking about now, and then he got to work to get an answer. And here's what his team did. First of all, they acted as if they were children. They went and watched children in their homes before they ever got to the hospital to understand what's the process and are they getting nervous before they ever come. Then he and his team put knee pads on, and they ended up literally going through the hospital as if they were little children to see what's it like from their perspective. And then they went home with the children afterwards to see what's it like afterwards. And then they went to preschools to watch how teachers help little children go through their schooling experience. They went to children's museums where thousands of children come and enjoy things. Understand, how do they process so many children and the children are happy during the process? All that data they put together, and here's what they created. It's called the GE Adventure Series. They turned it into an adventure, literally. So before the children arrive at the hospital, they get a little magazine like a comic book, and it tells them which adventure they're going on. It might be a space adventure, it might be an underwater adventure, it might be a pirate adventure. And this particular adventure, the pirate one, you'd get that booklet before you come as a kid, you'd arrive at the hospital, they'd put a pirate hat on your head, and then the staff would tell you about the story you're going to go through. And those machines make big, loud boom, boom, boom noises at certain times. They tell the children, when you hear that, don't worry. It's just the spaceship going faster or the pirate ship going faster. At the end of it, they get out, they get off the machine, they go over and get a prize from the treasure chest, they swing that monkey on the wall, and they go home. And what are most of these kids saying when they're going home? When can I come back? Seriously, to them it's like Disneyland. So instead of 80% of the children being sedated chemically to go in these machines, they reversed it to just 20% by creating an experience that changed it for the children's world. And so that's what these folks do. They go out and they watch. Scott Cook, who created Intuit, it's a small and medium-sized business and personal financial software company. Scott Cook is an observer at heart. His company, he teaches them how to be great observers, and here's the question he cares about. What's surprising? What's unexpected in this situation? Be it in a programming context, be it with customers, suppliers, clients, a process, what's surprising? What's unexpected? Well, Scott Cook and Intuit got surprised because there's a company called Xero based out of New Zealand that actually is now #1 on a small growth innovative company list we created, and they are out of New Zealand. And I ended up talking to Rod Drury, and it's like, Rod, how did you build this company that sells small and medium-sized software just like Intuit the giant does? How did you disrupt them? And Rod Drury told me a couple of weeks ago, I went out and I watched small business owners about 200 times to see what their day is like. So literally, he would go watch them for a day. I'm like, Rod, 200 people? And he said, yes. And here's the process they noticed. A small business owner showed up in the morning, they'd turn their PC on, it would take a long time to boot up, they'd go get coffee, they'd come back to the machine, and there was one piece of data they deeply cared about. All of these small business owners cared about one fundamental thing. They'd look at their bank statements first thing in the morning to figure out, do I have enough cash to run my business today? And what Rod Drury learned from that insight by watching these people was these folks don't want accounting software to tell them their taxes and so on. They want accounting software to tell them, how can I succeed today? And they've built it for that purpose based on observations they've made. So, another football sort of story. It starts with bowling balls. If we don't look for surprises, they look for us. Remember that. If we don't look for surprises, they will find us. So here we go. So, look for surprises. Don't let them look for you. Networkers, they not only watch, but they talk to people to get new ideas. So think for just a moment to yourself. If I had 10 or 15 seconds, whom would, make a list to yourself, mentally or literally, a list of whom would I go talk to about my problem I'm trying to get an answer to? And I have confidence that if I talk to them, they would help me see it differently. The conversation would spark a new insight, a new perspective. So think of who those people are. Remember the networkers who stood up? And they basically, they said, that's my way of getting new ideas? Those folks probably have a longer list already than the rest of us. Because they're used to doing this. They're used to thinking, I've got a problem, I'm going to go talk to somebody. Now here's the principle behind who you go talk to get a new idea.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC. We've got a little network going here, and it was very easy to set up.
We speak each other's language.
We share our internet connection. There are all sorts of things we do together. Who's this now?
This is that new digital camera from Japan. Just came out. Hajimemashite.
Hajimemashite.
Yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Wait. You speak her language?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everything just kind of works with a Mac. Arigato.
ねえねえねえ、誰とさ、オタクっぽくない？
Buongiorno. Hello.
It's a good story about the principle behind networking for new ideas. And here's the principle. When we're trying to find new friends, we look for somebody who's like us. When we're trying to find new ideas, it's the exact opposite. Someone who is not like me. It could be a different technical training, different function, different organization, different industry, different gender, different age. How many of you go get new ideas by talking to somebody 20 or 30 years older than you are? Hands up. Got a few hands. How about 20 or 30 years younger than you are? And for some of you in the room, I know they're not born yet, so I understand that. Okay, but the notion is generational differences. And so the issue becomes, could be nationality, could be industry, could be socioeconomic group. We seek out people who are not like us. That's the point. So let me tell you a story about basically, we shouldn't eat alone, but we should not eat with people who are like us. Let me tell you a story about eating together with people to get new ideas. Have you ever heard of Coutal wall cleaner? Anybody? I've never seen a hand go up all over the world on this one. In the spring in the 1940s and 50s, for Europe as well as North America, people would buy gallons, large cans of this wall cleaner because the coal-burning stoves would leave black soot on the wallpaper during the winter. In the spring, they would rub and roll this up and down the wall to clean off that black soot off the wallpaper. After the World War II, there was a problem, and that was a lot of these coal-burning stoves in homes were changed to gas and electricity. And when that happened, no more soot on the walls, no more black walls, no more need for Coutal wall cleaner. So the family is trying to figure out, what are we going to do with this business that creates our livelihood? They're sitting at a dinner table, And basically, here's the challenge. They're just trying to figure out, what could we do? What could we do? One person said, I noticed that in a magazine, they were taking our wall cleaner and turning it into Christmas tree ornaments, baking it in the oven and putting it on Christmas trees. They thought of doing that. One of the people who was not part of the Kutal company, a daughter-in-law, was a school teacher. She was listening to all this conversation. She said, you know, I've got a problem at school. I teach little kids. And here's the deal. If they use painter's sculpting or sculptor's clay, that kind of clay ruins clothes. It stains them. If I use that stuff where you mix flour and water and salt together and you make this clay, it gets dry and it falls apart. And somebody said, why don't you take a can of wall cleaner to school tomorrow and see if the kids like it? And that's what they did. And as you might know, that became PlayDoh, the thing you brought in. The kids loved it. And they took the exact same formula, they removed the detergent from the formula, and they put in almond extract to make it smell better. Nothing else different. Same cans, same factory, same mixers. They changed the label. It sold for 33 US cents as wall cleaner, and it sold for $1.51 as PlayDoh. And now, billions of cans later, it's been an incredible success. But it's a great story about a conversation across an industry or across something different. Mark Benioff at Salesforce.com, he's a great networker. This is what he does to get new ideas. It's what he did to get the idea for Salesforce. He'd been working in the large enterprise software systems for 20 plus years. He got burned out. He got frustrated that they weren't working for small and medium-sized enterprises. He traveled through India and the rest of the world talking to everybody. Religious leaders, political leaders, business leaders, small business owners, big business owners, all kinds of folks to figure out the idea for Salesforce.com. Now, 20 plus years later, Mark still does the same thing to make it better. He regularly asks young entrepreneurs, tech people, to come to his house for dinner in groups, and they talk about issues across generations related to their world. Drew Houston, who founded Dropbox, was one of those people at these conversations. And a conversation across a generation led them to add chatter onto their Salesforce.com system, which is kind of a mix of Facebook and Twitter combined internal safe within the enterprise. But that came from a conversation across different industries. The next skill these people use is they are experimenters at heart. They literally, somebody has an idea, a potential way of solving something. It's like, how could we try it? Think small, think fast, think cheap. So this company makes the machines that in different parts of the world, you take a can or a bottle of coins from home, you pour them into the machines, and then they give you a voucher back to use in a supermarket to buy groceries. It was a very successful company. Their market they'd grown, and they finally were getting stable. And basically, here's what ended up happening. Is they thought, what could we do differently? And somebody said, why don't we just like trade lots of credit cards, or not credit cards, excuse me, lots of voucher cards for 25 or 30 different stores, instead of just one voucher for one store. They're like, let's test it. So here's what they did. They bought a big cardboard box for like $10 US, 10 euros. They put an employee inside of the cardboard box. They put it in a supermarket parking lot. They cut holes in for, a hole here was put your money in here. They cut a hole here, get your gift card here. The people came. The person put their hand out and took their coins, and then they put the hand out and gave them a gift card in exchange. That's a fast, small, cheap experiment. They realized people loved it, and afterwards they rolled it out and it became quite a success. But the notion here is going fast, going quick, going cheap makes all the difference. I'm going to show a video from Nordstrom's where teams of IT people in 1 week do small, fast, cheap experiments.
I'm JB Brown, the Nordstrom Innovation Lab manager, and this is the lab. We work on 1 week experiments. Somebody will have an idea and we'll find a way to figure out how to prove if the idea is going to work. The Nordstrom Innovation Lab is a lean startup inside of a Fortune 500 company. A typical day in the Innovation Lab starts at about 9:30 where we'll have our stand-up meeting and figure out what we're going to do for that day and what we're going to try and accomplish. Once we've done that, our work is visible on our Kanban board and people then start pulling work throughout the day to knock off what we're trying to accomplish. And then at the end of our week, we have a retrospective meeting where we talk about not necessarily about the work we accomplished, but how we do as a team. We may create a prototype, a working prototype of software that we write. We may also just create a presentation based on leaner methods. So paper prototypes will draw things out and then put them in front of people and say, okay, what would you click on now? And they use a pen to say what they're going to click on and then determine if it's a good solution, and if it is, then work on a more functioning prototype. The most exciting part about working at this pace is the team that works on it bonds together and just a community of people that just want to work together and find out the real results. And it's really fun, and you don't have to have that red tape getting in the way. As we evolve and have new competitors, we will need to take risks but not lose money while we're taking those risks. So the gains are always a market opportunity where you get more customers or push your brand out to more people. The reason you'd want something like this in your company is because startups out in the industry are going to be doing this anyway, so you might as well take advantage of it and benefit from it instead of having them be competitors and having them come up with the new, fast, cool idea. We should do it ourselves and have it be Nordstrom.
So essentially, in 5 days, they drop into a store, they create an app that helps them solve a very small problem, and they do it week after week. One of the apps they did was people trying on sunglasses, and within 5 days, they had a way for them to easily do it and figure out which sunglass do I buy. That's the notion, small, fast, cheap. Amazon is born with this. Jeff Bezos is an experimenter at heart. He learned how to do this growing up on his grandparents' farm as a kid. In the summertime, when the tractors broke down, they tried to fix them themselves, and Jeff learned from that, if you try and try and try and try and try, at some point you'll figure out a way to solve it. And so experimenting is the way he does it. It's the way he did it initially with books. It's the way he did it when they moved beyond books. It's the way he did it when they moved to being, the Kindle, being in the cloud. All those things are experiments for them. And Jeff Bezos told us, my job as a leader at Amazon is to reduce the costs of experimentation so that we have thousands, not hundreds of experiments happening in our company. That's the spirit of their organization, is how can we make lots of people, how can we facilitate lots of people doing this kind of experimentation? That's what I mean by they act differently. If you were to shadow and follow these people, they would be asking questions that are provocative and challenging the status quo. They would be out there observing the world systematically. They would be talking to lots of different people. They would be experimenting and trying things, and that enables them to think differently. And basically, here's how they, let me scoot over to this part. Here's an example that you're going to bump into tonight, which is Eric Whitacre and the virtual choir. He thought differently. He connected the unconnected. Einstein called it combinatorial play. And the idea was, Eric Whitacre was trying to figure out, he's a great composer, a great conductor. He's like, how can I use the internet? And he created this phenomenal virtual choir around the world to do it. You'll get more about it tonight, but here's the point. He connected the unconnected to get the new idea. That's how these folks do it. So my quick question is, where do you get your best ideas? Where do you get those associational thoughts going? Where physically are you when you do that? Could you yell it out real loud in English if you can? Because I still don't know French very well. Where?
Cycling. Cycling.
Cycling. Running. Shower. Okay. You kind of know what I'm talking about, right? You know, running, shower, cycling, driving. For Diane Green, who founded VMware, her place is sailing alone on a sailboat. That's where she goes to get her ideas when she's stuck on a problem. So the issue becomes, if I want to get more ideas, I probably need to go there more often. I need to do the work and then go there to get those ideas. I was at Cirque du Soleil and I asked them, where do your people get their ideas? And I ask you, where does your team get its best ideas? Physically, where are they? And Daniel Lamar, the CEO of Cirque du Soleil, said, go to our cafeteria, that's where they get great ideas. And I walked down there. And you've got this place where it's just a bunch of very loud, intense conversations. You have people from the backstage on these Cirque du Soleil shows, people that perform in the Cirque du Soleil shows, people who craft different shows. They're all having conversations about what they're learning, what they could be doing differently. That's their place. So you don't have a place, find a place, make a place for these things to happen. We know that innovative organizations are led by innovative leaders. Remember those innovation premium companies, the ones who investors think will do cool things in the future? We know that at the top of those companies, leaders do what we just talked about. So Guy Laliberté, the guy on the left who founded Cirque du Soleil, still in his late 50s, he does this stuff all the time. He's out there with open eyes, getting new insights, trying stuff. He's pushing the edge to push his company. The second piece becomes, they have a philosophy where, in these companies, that not just the founder, like Guy Laliberté, but everyone in our organization can get new ideas if they just have the time and chance to use these skills. This guy's name is Andries Fixter, and you've probably never heard of him. He is an irrigation person. He puts the water on the orange groves in South Africa for Cedar Citrus. His job is to water the orange groves. But he also is a very good observer. And he's watching the orange groves one day, and he realizes the baboons, who love to steal things and have very good smellers, very good noses to smell scents, the baboons were running through the groves, and they were going, as he watched them over time, they were going to the same tree, one tree in the whole grove. And he walked over to that tree, and he's like, this makes no sense. The baboons are eating that fruit, but it's not time for the fruit to be ripe. And he pulled some of the fruit down, opened it up, smelled it, super sweet smell, tasted it, very juicy. It was ripe, and it made no sense. Then he goes to his supervisor, and he says, guess what I discovered? The baboons were consistently going through the fields, going to that one tree. This fruit is ripe, and it shouldn't be. And this was the moment of truth for them at Cedar Citrus. Somebody listened to Andries Fixter's observation. They then went to the technical people, had a conversation, explored it further. Here's what they discovered. The tree was a genetic mutation. It actually produced 2 seasons of fruit in 1 season. They ended up cloning the tree, planting it all throughout Cedar Citrus groves. Now they've cloned it across South Africa because it creates incredible competitive advantage. They get twice the production, all from an observation. So in the end, here's the story. Whether it's us doing this stuff or someone else, in the end, we are our choices. Build yourself a great story. Even if you or your people don't have time to innovate, find the time to use these skills to solve the problems you care about. That's what those innovators leaders do all over the world. What we know from our data is that innovative leaders of innovative companies spend twice as much time using these skills to solve their problems. They don't just sit in their office thinking about it. What that translates into is 4 months out of every year they're spending doing this stuff versus a non-innovative leader at a non-innovative company, it's about 2 months out of the year. They just do it more. And so my point becomes the following. Make a difference. Make the difference for you and your own problems that you want to solve. How many of you are innovators out there? If I were to say, are you an innovator, could you raise your hand? I want to see you, so I'm covering up. There we go.
What do you mean?
We don't have time to get into definitions here. So I see about 1/4 of the hands. How many of you solve problems? Now, this is a trick question. You know it's coming. If you're solving a problem, you don't have an answer to it, right? So somehow, you've got to creatively solve the problem. I don't care whether you are innovators or creative problem solvers. Honestly, I don't care what the name is. What we know is that these skills enable people to creatively solve their problems better. These are the skills that make it happen more successfully. So one last question. What do 4-year-olds do all over the world? I know they do it in France. We lived in Abu Dhabi. They did it in Abu Dhabi. We lived in Finland. They do it in Finland. I've traveled like you traveled. What do 4-year-olds do all over the world? They play?
Watching screen.
They ask questions. Did I hear that right?
They watch screens.
They keep asking why.
They keep asking why. They do this stuff. Am I right? How many of you have 4-year-olds in your house right now? Anybody? Do they ask lots of questions? Do they try just about anything? Do they talk to anybody? Do they watch you really carefully? Am I right? Is that what 4-year-olds do? How many of us were once 4 years old? We all were. And that's why I fundamentally believe that everyone has more creative capacity than they sometimes think, and these are the skills to that end point. So make a difference for yourself, and the second difference is make a difference for the people around you by enabling them to use these skills to solve their problems, and even outside of a corporate environment, make a difference for those kids who are around you. They could be in your home, they could be in your neighborhood. This is a little girl I took a picture of playing with her grandfather in China, and you could tell he loved that granddaughter and enabled her to use these skills and keep them alive and well. This is an image of one of our granddaughters. We're a merger and acquisition family. I had 3 children. My wife had 4 children. Now we have 7 children who are adults, and then we have 6 grandchildren. Her name is Stella. Stella, when I took that picture, she was looking up at me, and when I looked at the image afterwards, I realized she was really looking at me. She was paying attention. And so one of my final recommendations is take the PlayDoh away with you, that little can you got of PlayDoh, to remind you, make a difference, both for yourself, for the people you work with, and even beyond for these young children growing up, because they are our future, and we need to help them keep these skills alive and well. So with that, good luck on your journey. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Questions?
2 questions.
That works. I have a slight question while you're thinking for a moment. And that would be, if you were to do this in your company right now, in other words, if you were to spend time going out and observing end users, if you were to go out and talk to 7 different people in the next 4 weeks, if you were to try some mini small experiments, are there any barriers in your organization that keep you from doing that? That's my question. And if there are, I mean, I'm happy to respond to any questions about how do you deal with those. I'm also happy to sit down because we don't have to answer questions. So anyway. Yes.
Thank you very much for the framework for creativity. Do you think sometimes executing is more difficult than creating? Having the process that follows the ideation stage is sometimes more difficult.
I'm going to answer it with a question, and then I'll come back to it. I saw, how many sort of see yourself as more of an innovator or more of an executor. So if you were to say, I'm more of an innovator or I'm more of an executor, which are you more of? So if I'm more of an executor, just real quickly stand up. I'm more of an executor than an innovator. Stand up. You got to be one or the other. So executors, you're up. Okay. Innovators, your turn. Now, I see a few more innovators than executors, and I see about a third of you who don't know who you are. But that's okay. You might be in the middle. Here's this, to me, here's the story in response, is that We know from our data that getting ideas is not everything, obviously. We also know, I hear often, we have too many ideas running around our company, we just need to get them done. And my first response is, tell me about your ideas. Tell me if the process of getting that idea meant that somebody or a team of people spent energy consistently asking different questions about the problem, spent extended amounts of time observing a process or a product or a service, maybe 4 hours, 2 or 3 times, talked to maybe 10 or 12 different people from all kind of diverse backgrounds, and then, maybe they tried an experiment or two. Are they those kind of ideas? Or are they the kinds of ideas that somebody just thinks up in their office? And those think up in your office ideas, for the most part, aren't very helpful. They're risky. And so I can get better ideas by using these skills for what it's worth. The second part then becomes, and it's the Steve Jobs story at Apple. When Steve Jobs founded Apple in 1980 and then to 1984, their innovation premium was like 35–40%. They were very successful. And then Steve Jobs got fired from the company he founded, in large part because he did not honor and respect people who were good at execution. They hired in Scully to turn a $200 million company into a $1 billion company. He put in process procedures, and Steve Jobs said, that's not for me, I'm ignoring you. And so is my team. The board of directors fired him. 10 years later, the innovation premium for Apple was negative 50%. They were a disaster. They were on the brink of bankruptcy. Steve Jobs comes back. One of the first people he hired was Tim Cook. Tim Cook, now the CEO, had been running supply chains for Compaq and other computer companies around the world, and he was doing it at a world-class level. Now, here's why I'm sharing that story is, I think Steve Jobs, in his second act at Apple, then he learned that execution matters. And he hired somebody who was very different from him, and he honored and respected that person's skills, and he was telling the rest of Apple, we are a company with new ideas, but we also have to get them done. And now that Steve Jobs has passed away, Apple has a challenge, which is Cook is he's an executor, which is good. Now they got to figure out, can they figure out a good balancing act with other people who can take that innovator role and make it work together? Innovation is a team sport. It's innovators and executors who really honor each other. Then they talk to each other, they collaborate, and this stuff actually succeeds. Remember the image of Daniel Lamar and Cirque du Soleil? Guy Liberté, the founder, is an innovator. Daniel Lamar, the CEO, is more of an executor. I mean, it's a story in company after company. It's the combination that makes it work when they work well together. Thank you again. All the best. Thank you.